Most ancient Egyptian temples were built in isolated desert locations, far from cities and everyday life. The Valley of the Kings was hidden in remote cliffs. Abu Simbel was carved into a mountain hundreds of miles from anywhere. Even massive Karnak Temple stood on the outskirts of the ancient city. But there's one major temple that breaks this pattern completely. Luxor Temple sits in the very heart of the modern city of Luxor, surrounded by hotels, shops, restaurants, and busy streets. 3,400 years ago, it was also in the city center, built deliberately among the people rather than isolated in sacred seclusion. This wasn't an accident. Luxor Temple served a completely different purpose than other Egyptian temples. While most temples were houses for specific gods where priests performed daily rituals away from public view, Luxor Temple was built for a massive public festival called the Opet Festival, one of ancient Egypt's most important religious celebrations. For centuries, Luxor Temple was buried under sand, debris, and even an entire village built on top of it. A 14th-century mosque, the Mosque of Abu Haggag, was constructed on what people thought was a hill. They didn't realize they were building on top of an ancient temple buried 30 feet deep. When archaeologists excavated Luxor Temple in the late 1800s, they made a remarkable decision. Rather than demolish the medieval mosque, they left it in place, creating one of the most unusual archaeological sites in the world where a functioning mosque sits atop a pharaonic temple. Today, Luxor Temple is most spectacular at night, when dramatic illumination transforms the ancient stones into something magical, revealing details invisible by day and creating an atmosphere that connects us to the mystery and grandeur of ancient Egypt. So what was the Opet Festival, and why did it require a special temple in the city center? The Opet Festival was ancient Egypt's most important celebration of divine kingship, held annually during the Nile's flood season, typically lasting between 11 and 27 days, depending on the period. The festival's purpose was to renew the pharaoh's divine power and legitimize his rule by connecting him to the gods, specifically the Theban triad, Amunias-Re, his wife Mut, and their son Khonsu. Here's how it worked. The sacred bark boats containing statues of Amunias, Mut, and Khonsu would be carried from Karnak Temple, 2 miles north, down the avenue of Sphinxes to Luxor Temple. This wasn't a quiet priestly procession. The Opet Festival was Egypt's biggest party, with thousands of citizens lining the route, musicians playing, dancers performing, acrobats entertaining, and priests distributing food and beer to the crowds. When the divine statues reached Luxor Temple, something mysterious happened inside the inner sanctuary, away from public view. The pharaoh would enter alone with the god Amunias-Re's statue. Ancient texts describe this as a ritual where the pharaoh's Ka, his divine life force, was renewed through union with the god. Some scholars believe this involved a sacred marriage ceremony, possibly symbolic, between the pharaoh and the goddess. Others think it was a ritual rebirth where the pharaoh emerged spiritually reborn as Amunias-Re's living son on earth. The exact details were secret, known only to the highest priests and the pharaoh himself. What we know is that when the pharaoh emerged from his sanctuary, he had been transformed from a mortal ruler into a divine king, his right to rule confirmed by the gods themselves. The festival would conclude with massive celebrations, and the divine statues would return to Karnak. The avenue of Sphinxes connecting Karnak and Luxor temples is one of ancient Egypt's most impressive engineering projects. This sacred processional way stretched nearly 2 miles and was lined with over 1,300 Sphinx statues. Recent archaeological work has fully excavated and restored this ancient road, which was reopened with great ceremony in November 2021. Walking this avenue today, visitors can experience the same route the ancient gods and pharaohs took during the Opet Festival. The Sphinxes come in different styles, depending on which pharaoh commissioned which section. Some have human heads, representing Pharaoh Nectanebo I, who renovated the avenue in the 4th century BC. Others have ram heads, representing Amunias-Re, the king of gods. The avenue wasn't just a road. It was a sacred space designed to transport participants from the everyday world into a divine realm. As you walked from Karnak toward Luxor Temple, the experience was deliberately choreographed. The massive Sphinx statues on both sides creating a corridor, the anticipation building, the sounds of celebration growing louder, and finally arriving at Luxor Temple's magnificent entrance. Luxor Temple itself is relatively small compared to Karnak, but what it lacks in size it makes up for in elegance and preservation. The temple was primarily built by two pharaohs, Amenhotep III around 1390 BC, who constructed the inner chambers and colonnade, and Ramses II around 1270 BC, who added the massive entrance pylon with its colossal seated statues, the peristyle court, and more decorations. The entrance pylon originally had two towering obelisks flanking the gateway, both covered in hieroglyphics praising Ramses II's military victories and devotion to the gods. But today, only one obelisk stands at Luxor Temple. The other was stolen. In 1833, Muhammad Ali Pasha, the ruler of Egypt, made a decision that still angers Egyptologists today. He gifted one of Luxor Temple's ancient obelisks to France. Why? France had helped him politically, and he wanted to strengthen diplomatic relations. The French were delighted. The obelisk, weighing 250 tons and standing 75 feet tall, was carefully lowered, loaded onto a specially built ship, and transported down the Nile to Alexandria, then across the Mediterranean to France. In 1836, it was erected in the center of Paris's Place de la Concorde, where it stands today, surrounded by Parisian traffic, thousands of miles from its original home. The French promised to send Egypt a clock for the mosque in Cairo's citadel in exchange. They did send a clock, but never worked properly. So Egypt traded a 3,000-year-old pharaonic monument for a broken clock. This was during the colonial period when European powers freely took ancient Egyptian artifacts, claiming they were saving them or that Egypt didn't appreciate its own heritage. Countless obelisks, statues, mummies, and treasures were shipped to museums in London, Paris, Berlin, and New York. The Rosetta Stone sits in the British Museum. Nefertiti's bust is in Berlin. Tutankhamun's treasures, while mostly in Cairo, were almost taken by Howard Carter before Egyptian authorities prevented it. Today, Egypt has been campaigning for the return of these stolen artifacts, particularly the Luxor obelisk. French authorities have refused, arguing it's now part of French cultural heritage. The debate over colonial-era artifact acquisition continues worldwide, with museums slowly beginning to return some items to their countries of origin. But the Luxor obelisk remains in Paris, a permanent reminder of Egypt's colonial past and the cultural theft that occurred in the name of appreciation. The Mosque of Abu Hagag, built in the 14th century AD, sits perched on top of Luxor Temple's courtyard, about 45 feet above the current ground level. This unusual placement happened because for over 1,000 years, Luxor Temple was completely buried under sand, silt, and debris from Nile floods. An entire village called El Luxor was built on top of the buried ruins. The residents had no idea they were living on an ancient temple. When French archaeologist Gaston Maspero began excavating Luxor Temple in 1881, he uncovered the ancient structures buried beneath the medieval buildings. He faced a dilemma: demolish the mosque and village to fully excavate the temple, or preserve the later Islamic heritage while excavating around it. Maspero chose a compromise. He excavated the temple carefully, removing houses but preserving the mosque, which now sits elevated on a platform of ancient ruins. This created the unique situation we see today. Visitors can stand in the ancient pharaonic courtyard, looking up at a medieval mosque that appears to float above the temple. The mosque is still active, with daily prayers, while tourists explore the ancient temple below. This layering of history, pharaonic Egypt beneath Islamic Egypt, tells a powerful story about continuity and change. The mosque is dedicated to Abu Hagag, a 12th century Islamic holy man who settled in Luxor and became the city's patron saint. Every year, Luxor celebrates the Mulid of Abu Hagag, a festival with processions, boats paraded through the streets, and massive celebrations. Remarkably, This Islamic festival follows the same route as the ancient Opet Festival, from Karnak area to Luxor Temple. People still parade boats, still celebrate in the streets, still gather for religious renewal. The festival changed religions, but the sacred geography and human need for celebration remained constant across 3,000 years. Luxor Temple transforms at night. As the sun sets over the Nile and darkness falls, dramatic lighting illuminates the ancient stones, creating shadows that emphasize every carved hieroglyphic, every column's detail, every colossal statue's features. The temple takes on a completely different character after dark. Details invisible in harsh daylight become visible. The colors of remaining paint on columns glow under artificial light. The massive pylon entrance becomes even more imposing when lit from below. The colonnade of Amenhotep III, with its towering papyrus bundle columns, creates a mystical corridor of stone and shadow. Modern sound and light shows project images onto the temple walls,